In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Following the previous discussions about Avicenna's view about knowledge, in this session I want to explain his ideas about particular and universal perception or understanding. Let's read the text first of all. Avicenna regards the perception of universals as the function of the immaterial rational faculty. However, concerning the perception of particulars, he makes a detailed distinction. He considers each person's perception of himself to be an immaterial particular perception. By contrast, he holds that the perception of material particulars, including sensory, imaginative, and estimative perceptions, occurs through a bodily faculty, in effect without employing the terminology of knowledge by presence and acquired knowledge. Avicenna regards particular acquired knowledge as material in nature. In the philosophy, we use particular perception or particular understanding and universal understanding. Or sometimes we say particular concepts and universal concepts. For example, when we speak about a special man, for example, a man, or for example, a man or a woman, when we refer to a specific person or a specific country or a specific town, in these cases we have particular concept. For example, England, Iran, or Tehran. You have here particular concept. But when we generate it, we have universal concept. For example, country. Instead of particular country, when we say country, country is a universal concept. When we refer to a specific person, it is particular perception or particular concept. But when we say human being includes different and various people with different names. Here we have universal concept. So the question is that are all kinds of understanding requires immaterial soul and immaterial rational faculty? It is a matter of dispute. In the philosophy of Mullah Sada, yes, all sorts of understanding and perception requires an immaterial rational faculty, or we can say immaterial faculty. But in the philosophy of Avicenna, only two kinds of perception, two kinds of concepts, we can say, two kinds of perception of the concepts requires immaterial faculty. First of all is rational concepts, which means universal concepts. For example, suppose the name of someone is, for example, Michael, or the name of someone is another name. When we refer to himself, it is sensory concept and sensory perception. Here, according to Avicenna, there is no need to immaterial faculty. But when we generate it, when we make the general concept, the universal concept. Perception of such sort of concepts requires a material faculty. So, understanding of the concept of the human being, for example, requires a material rational faculty. So, in the philosophy of Avicenna, when we understand the universal perceptions, it requires a material faculty. But how about particulars? About particulars, Avicenna distinguishes between different sorts of particular concepts. He says that when we understand ourselves, in the Islamic philosophy it is called al-ilm al-huzuri, knowledge by presence. For example, when I understand myself, when I understand my feelings, here this sort of knowledge requires and needs a material faculty also. But about other particulars, for example, when I have perception of my friend or perception of a special book, not the universal concept of book, particular book. Here, according to Avicenna, we don't need a material faculty. This is called sensory perception. And we have imaginative and estimative perceptions. I will argue and I will explain the meaning of imaginative and estimative perception in the philosophy of Avicenna. But here the conclusion is that in the philosophy of Avicenna, perception and understanding of universals require an immaterial faculty. But about the particulars, he distinguishes between two sorts. Those particulars that are related to the knowledge by presence. For example, where I understand myself or my feelings. Here he also says that we need an immaterial faculty. But about other understanding of other particulars, for example, sensory perceptions, for example, understanding particular person or particular city or particular town. Here in the philosophy of Avicenna, we have sensory perception, and sensory perception occurs through a bodily faculty, al-mudrik al-jismani. I will explain this more. So here it is important. Avicenna in the particulars, about particular concepts, about understanding of particular concepts, Avicenna does not use the term knowledge by presence, but he explains the content. He says that he says, and he explains it by some examples. He says that when I understand myself and my feeling, that means knowledge by presence, but he does not use the term. Here we need a material faculty. But about other perceptions, sensory particular perceptions, we don't need an immaterial faculty. The division of apprehension into conception and essence. The division of apprehension idrak into conception and essence was first introduced by Al-Farabi, and Avicenna subsequently adopted the same classification. Essence involves judgment and the soul's acknowledgement of the occurrence or non-occurrence of a relation, i.e. the truth or falsity of a proposition. Conception, by contrast, does not possess this feature. This division is a very common classification in the Islamic philosophy, which first introduced by Al-Farabi, and then Avicenna used this terminology. We have two sources of apprehension. The first source is conception. For example, when I say, for example, England, or when I say father, or when I say father of this person, here we have conception. Conception does not have judgment. But when we make a proposition and then we judge, for example, when we say the father of this person is for example, good, here we have judgment. When we say color, it is conception. When we say green, it is conception. But when we have judgment, when we say that the color of this book is green, here we have judgment. Judgment, or al-hukm. Judgment means to say something and to accept something or reject something, to judge and to judge of something. When we say the color of this book is yellow, it is judgment. So it is called assent or tasdiq. But when we don't have judgment, for example, when we say the color of this book without judgment, it is conception. We have conception, tasawwur, and assent, tasdiq. But the point in the philosophy of Avicenna is that the judgment is the role of soul. In the contemporary epistemology, we use conception and assent, but we don't refer to the soul. But in the philosophy of Avicenna, he refers to the soul. He says that we have soul's acknowledgement. So who acknowledges the judgment? Who acknowledged the judgment? Avicenna is not physicalist. Avicenna is not materialist. Avicenna is substance dualist. Therefore, according to his philosophy, he says that the judgment and acknowledgement, it is the act of the soul. In the next session, I will explain the next topic, which is about sensory and imaginative conception.